Picture this. You wake up in a world where every rustle of the wind, every shadow at dusk, carries a hidden message. A world where the line between reality and the supernatural blurs so completely that even the simplest daily choice could mean life or death. This was the Middle Ages, a time when superstitions weren't just old wives' tales. They were the invisible threads weaving through every aspect of existence. From the moment a child was born to the way crops were planted, from the battles fought to the love letters written, medieval life was governed by beliefs so powerful they could dictate the fate of entire kingdoms. And the most astonishing part, these weren't just fleeting fears. They were the bedrock of society, the rules everyone lived by. Think about it. What if you truly believed that a black cat crossing your path wasn't just bad luck, but a sign of impending doom? Or that the way you held your knife at dinner could invite evil spirits into your home? For medieval people, these weren't hypotheticals. They were daily realities. A sneeze could summon demons. A howling dog might herald death. Even the stars weren't just celestial bodies. They were omens, whispering secrets about the future. And the stakes, unimaginably high. Get it wrong and your village might starve. Your child might fall ill. Your king might lose his throne. Superstitions weren't just quirks of the past. They were survival strategies deeply embedded in the fabric of life. So why did these beliefs hold such unimaginable power? And how did they shape the course of history in ways we're still uncovering today? Over the next few minutes, we're diving into 20 of the most shocking superstitions that dictated medieval life. Rituals so bizarre, omens so deadly, they'll make your skin crawl. We'll explore how fear and faith collided in ways that still echo in our modern world, from the symbols hidden in our fairy tales to the habits we can't quite shake. This isn't just a journey into the past. It's a mirror held up to our own deepest instincts. Ready to step into a world where the supernatural was as real as the ground beneath your feet? Let's begin. The evil eye wasn't just a fleeting superstition. It was a terror woven into the very fabric of medieval life. Imagine walking through a village where every doorway bore a painted blue eye, staring blankly into the distance. These weren't decorations, they were shields. People believed a single jealous glance, even from a neighbor, could wither crops, sour milk, or strike a child with sudden illness. The fear was so pervasive that even kings trembled at the thought of unseen malice. Court records show monarchs hiring mystics to chant spells or fashion amulets from twisted roots and polished stones, all to deflect the curse of a rival's gaze. But the defenses didn't stop there. Ordinary folks carried pebbles with natural holes, threaded onto cords, believing these porous charms could trap the evil eye's energy before it reached them. Mothers spat over their left shoulders 3 times after praising their babies, a desperate ritual to cancel out any lurking envy. And in some villages, farmers would bury a handful of salt at the corners of their fields, whispering prayers to Saint Michael as they worked. What's fascinating is how this superstition straddled 2 worlds. Its roots reached back to ancient pagan beliefs, where spirits lurked in every shadow, yet medieval Christians adapted it seamlessly. Priests even blessed amulets, merging old fears with new faith. The evil eye's grip reveals something profound about the medieval mind. Danger wasn't just physical, it was invisible, carried on a sigh or a sideways look. In a world without science to explain misfortune, envy became a supernatural force. A failed harvest, someone's glare poisoned the soil, a stillborn child, a stranger's lingering gaze. This superstition wasn't just about fear, It was a way to make sense of chaos. And in a cruel twist, it often turned communities against themselves. A widow with a thriving garden might be accused of wielding the evil eye herself, her success seen as proof of dark magic. The line between victim and villain blurred in the panic. What's chilling is how these echoes linger. Even today, we knock on wood or avoid saying things aloud for fear of jinxing them. The evil eye's legacy lives on in charms sold at Mediterranean markets, or the way parents discreetly pinch their babies to ward off compliments. Medieval people may not have understood the psychology behind envy, but their solutions, amulets, rituals, whispered prayers, reveal a universal truth: the human need to feel control in an unpredictable world. And that's just the beginning. Because if a mere glance could unravel lives, imagine what they feared from the creatures lurking in the dark. A sudden sneeze in the Middle Ages wasn't just a reflex, it was a crisis. The air rushing from your lungs carried something far more precious than germs. Medieval minds believed it expelled your very soul, leaving your body an empty vessel for demons to claim. That's why even today, we reflexively say, "God bless you," a phrase born from this ancient terror. Originally, it wasn't politeness. It was a desperate prayer to seal your spirit back inside before dark forces noticed the breach. Physicians of the era wrote chilling warnings about the sneezing hour, especially at dusk, when shadows lengthened and evil spirits grew bold. Manuscripts advised covering the mouth not for hygiene, but to trap the escaping soul like a net catching a fleeting bird. In some regions, mothers would clamp a hand over a child's nose mid-sneeze, whispering Latin verses to reinforce the body's defenses. Even the timing mattered. A sneeze before breakfast, a lucky omen. One after sunset, a death sentence in the making. The roots of this fear ran deep. Early Christian texts described sneezes as echoes of Adam's first breath, proof the soul could enter or exit the body as easily as air. Pagan traditions merged with this belief, tying sneezes to fate. Norse legends claimed a sneeze was the gods debating your future, while Slavic healers listened for coughs afterward, convinced demons might hitchhike back in. The terror was so widespread that during the plague, a single sneeze could exile entire families, suspected of harboring not just disease, but cursed souls. What's striking is how this superstition exposed medieval logic. Without understanding biology, they mapped the unseen onto the tangible. If breath carried life, then losing it, even briefly, invited chaos. And the solutions reveal ingenuity. Monks crafted sneeze charms from rowan wood, carved with crosses to bolt the soul in place. Brides wore veils not just for modesty, but as spiritual filters. Even architecture played a part. Doorways were built low to force bowing, a posture believed to keep the soul from jolting loose. Yet for all its strangeness, this fear left fingerprints on our world. The custom of blessing sneezers endured wars and plagues, evolving into habit long after the original meaning faded. Modern allergy sufferers might roll their eyes at medieval hysteria, but consider this. How many of us still pause after a sneeze, waiting for that reflexive, "bless you"? The past whispers in our reflexes, proving how deeply these survival instincts were carved into culture. And if something as small as a sneeze could unravel the soul, imagine the dread stirred by creatures that prowled the night, like the shapeshifters believed to walk among them. Friday the 13th wasn't just an unlucky date. It was on the medieval calendar, a day when the universe itself seemed to tilt toward disaster. The roots of this dread ran deeper than most realized, tangled in two ancient tragedies separated by centuries. First, the Last Supper, where 13 figures gathered, 12 apostles and Judas, the betrayer whose kiss sealed Christ's fate. That number became stained with treachery. Then came Norse legend, where 12 gods feasted until Loki, the shape-shifting trickster, crashed the party as the 13th guest. His presence sparked a chain of events leading to death, the beloved god of light. Two cultures, two catastrophes, both pinned to the number 13. By the Middle Ages, this fear had calcified into law. Account books from Venetian merchants show no transactions logged on the 13th, especially if it fell on a Friday, the day of Christ's crucifixion. Double the doom. Ships, captains refused to set sail, convinced the sea itself would revolt. In England, court records reveal nobles delaying trials, knights postponing duels, even hesitating to deliver babies on this cursed date. One chilling account describes a French village where 13 rats appeared in the square on Friday the 13th. Within weeks, half the town had succumbed to plague. Coincidence? To medieval minds, it was prophecy. The precautions bordered on obsessive. Some households would set 13 place settings at dinner, leaving one empty to confuse wandering spirits. Others nailed rowan branches above doorways, their red berries said to bleed away bad luck. But the most telling ritual came from Germany, where farmers would circle their fields 13 times at midnight, scattering salt, not for fertility, but as a barrier. They believed misfortune moved in patterns, and by walking the number's shape, they could trap its power within the furrows. What's fascinating is how this superstition exposed medieval logic. Without statistics to quantify risk, they relied on narrative. 13 wasn't just a number, it was a character in history's darkest stories, a repeat offender in cosmic crimes. And Friday, the day Eve offered Adam the apple, the day Cain slew Abel. Every tragedy left fingerprints on the calendar. Modern psychology might call it apophenia, seeing patterns where none exist, but to them, it was survival. If 13 knives on a table mirrored the Last Supper's deadly arrangement, wouldn't you hide the extra cutlery? Yet the superstition's endurance is its real mystery. Medieval scribes noted that King Philip IV of France arrested the Knights Templar on Friday, October 13th, 1307, a date that became shorthand for institutional betrayal. Centuries later, the fear persists. High-rises skip the 13th floor, hospitals avoid numbering 13th rooms, and surgeons report fewer elective procedures on these days. The past clings to us in ways we don't even notice. Because while we might laugh at medieval hysteria, how many of us still hesitate before scheduling a flight or signing a contract on Friday the 13th? Some shadows never fade. And speaking of shadows, few things terrified the Middle Ages more than the ones that moved unnaturally. Like the creatures they believed could steal your face with a glance under the pale glow of a full moon, medieval villages locked their doors twice, once against thieves and once against neighbors. Because in the dead of night, the most terrifying predator wasn't lurking in the forest. It was the butcher who sold you meat by day, the blacksmith who fixed your plow, the quiet widower who lived at the edge of town. This was the chilling reality of lycanthropy, the belief that men could shed their skin like a cloak and become wolves, not as metaphor, not as madness, as fact. The trials tell the story. In 1589, a French farmer named confessed to hunting as a wolf after villagers found him naked and blood-caked in the woods. His defense: a demon had given him an ointment that unstitched his humanity. Across Europe, hundreds faced similar accusations. In Germany, accused werewolves were examined for wolf signs, bristly hair on their palms, eyebrows that met in the middle. Some courts even staged tests, forcing suspects to walk on all fours to see if their joints moved with animal grace. The punishments were grisly: burnings, hangings. One Swiss record describes a man being flayed alive so authorities could search for fur beneath his skin. But why this particular terror? The answer lies in the medieval mind's fragile boundary between man and beast. Wolves were more than predators. They were Satan's spies, creatures that moved between worlds. Church frescoes depicted them carrying damned souls to hell, warned of wolves that spoke in human tongues. When famine struck or children vanished, lycanthropy offered a brutal logic. Evil wore a familiar face. The real horror wasn't the transformation. It was the idea that darkness lived inside ordinary men, waiting for the moon's pull to set it free. People fought back with wolfsbane, a purple-flowered plant so toxic that touching it could blister skin. Farmers planted it around cottages like living barbed wire, while mothers tucked dried sprigs into cradles. In Bohemia, travelers wore amulets filled with powdered silver and garlic, a recipe said to burn the wolf from a man's veins. Some villages took drastic measures. Records from Livonia describe a community that beheaded every stray dog during winter solstices, believing werewolves could jump souls into animals. The line between precaution and paranoia was razor-thin. What's haunting is how these fears mirrored deeper anxieties. Werewolf trials often targeted outsiders, the poor, the mentally ill, those who lived beyond society's edges. In a world without psychiatry, lycanthropy became a catch-all explanation for violence or erratic behavior. But the superstition also spoke to a universal dread. That civilization was just a thin veneer. One full moon, one moment of weakness, and the beast within might win. We've dismissed the werewolf as folklore, yet its legacy lingers. The word lunatic comes from luna, the Latin for moon, a relic of the belief that celestial bodies could warp minds. Modern crime thrillers still use wolf imagery for serial killers. And every Halloween, we play dress-up as monsters, never quite admitting that the scariest costumes aren't the fangs or fur, it's the human face underneath. Because medieval people understood something we often forget: the most terrifying transformations don't require magic, just the right trigger. And the next full moon is always on the horizon. The mandrake root didn't just grow in the earth, it thrived in nightmares. Shaped like a twisted human figure, this plant was said to scream when uprooted, a sound so horrifying it could burst eardrums or snap minds like dry twigs. Medieval herbals warned that harvesting it barehanded meant certain death, so they devised a macabre workaround. At midnight, under a waning moon, herbalists would tie a starving dog to the mandrake with a long rope, then toss meat just beyond reach. As the dog lunged, it would yank the root free and absorb the fatal scream while its owner crouched behind a tree, fingers jammed in ears. The dog's sacrifice was collateral damage in the pursuit of nature's most forbidden power. This wasn't just superstition, it was proto-science. Mandrake contained hallucinogenic alkaloids that could indeed cause delirium or death if misused. But medieval mines its dangers into myth. Apothecaries sold mandrake babies, roots carved to resemble infants, claiming they brought wealth or fertility. Witches were said to feed them drops of blood to keep them alive. And in love spells, a sliver of mandrake under the pillow could supposedly bend a crush's will, though at what cost, no one dared ask. The line between medicine and magic blurred completely. A German manuscript from 1423 depicts a monk whispering prayers as he harvests mandrake with a silver trowel, the tool believed to mute the scream. Even the church, which condemned most folk magic, couldn't resist the root's allure. The rituals around mandrake reveal a darker truth about medieval survival. In an era without anesthesia, its numbing properties made it a surgical staple, but patients risked slipping into comas or visions. Used diluted mandrake to ease childbirth, walking a razor's edge between relief and poison. And on battlefields, crushed mandrake in wine was the era's morphine, dulling pain as surgeons sawed shattered limbs. Every use carried the ghost of that scream, the knowledge that healing and harm grew from the same soil. What's haunting is how the mandrake myth endured. Shakespeare wove it into Romeo and Juliet as a potion mimicking death. Alchemists sketched it as the little gallows man, a half-plant, half-human hybrid. Even modern pharmacology nods to its legacy. The drug atropine, derived from mandrake's cousin belladonna, still stops hearts in overdoses. We've stripped away the folklore, but the fear lingers in our caution around potent plants, because perhaps medieval people weren't entirely wrong. Some forces in nature do scream when disturbed, just not in ways ears can hear. And if a root could hold such duality, what other superstitions might be whispers of truths we've forgotten ravens circled medieval minds long before they darkened castle towers? To some, these glossy black birds were winged death, their croaks the soundtrack to Viking raids that had once ripped through coastal towns like divine punishment. Monasteries banned them entirely, convinced their presence summoned disaster. Yet in the same breath, kings like Bran the Blessed revered them as guardians, feeding them from golden bowls. This stark contradiction reveals something profound about medieval superstition. Omens weren't fixed. They bent to the fears and needs of those who believed. The terror wasn't arbitrary. When Norse longships appeared on the horizon, ravens often flew ahead, scouts for the invaders. By the time the birds landed on rooftops, axes weren't far behind. Plague, too, seemed to follow their shadows. Parish records from London describe ravens pecking at corpses during the Black Death, their feathers matted with blood and sickness. Small wonder families nailed dead crows to barn doors as warnings to the living, stay away. Some villages took it further, hiring raven wardens to patrol with slingshots, their sole job to keep the skies clear of black wings. Yet in Wales, legend told of Bran the Blessed, a giant king whose severed head continued speaking after death, protected by ravens that carried his wisdom. His followers buried the head beneath the Tower of London, believing as long as ravens remained there, Britain would never fall. The same birds deemed cursed elsewhere became patriotic symbols. Even Charlemagne kept a pet raven named Grip, teaching it to recite psalms as proof that darkness could be tamed. What explains this duality? Context. To a fisherman whose son drowned after ravens perched on his nets, they were demons. To a king who'd won battles under their flight, they were divine messengers. Medieval people read the natural world like a book written in riddles, where every creature had multiple meanings. A raven near a sickbed, ominous. One circling a battlefield, a sign of coming victory. After all, carrion meant dead enemies. The rituals around ravens exposed this flexibility. Farmers would scatter grain to lure them away from homes, yet hunters left offerings to attract them before expeditions, believing ravens could sniff out prey. In Ireland, finding a white raven feather was considered luckier than four-leaf clovers, while in Scotland, it meant someone in your family would vanish within a year. The bird itself never changed, only the stories draped over its wings. We've inherited these contradictions. Today, ravens still haunt the Tower of London, their wings clipped by royal decree to uphold Bran's ancient prophecy. Edgar immortalized them as melancholy prophets, yet native cultures revere them as trickster creators. The Middle Ages understood something we often forget. Superstitions aren't about truth. They're about the stories we need to survive. Because sometimes, a bird isn't just a bird. It's a mirror reflecting our deepest fears and our unshakable hope that darkness might somehow serve the light. And if even ravens could be both omen and guardian, what other contradictions lurked in the medieval world? Like the belief that something as fragile as an egg could hold the power to curse or cure. To be left-handed in the Middle Ages wasn't just inconvenient, it was damnable. The very word sinister traces back to the Latin, meaning left, a linguistic stain that reveals centuries of fear. Medieval scribes wrote of left-handed children as touched by the shadow, their natural inclination seen as proof of the devil's influence. Schools became where teachers tied left hands behind backs or struck knuckles with rulers until blood blistered, all to force the correct hand into service. But this wasn't just about penmanship. It was about purging perceived evil from the soul itself. The legal consequences were staggering. Notarial records from Florence show contracts annulled if signed left-handed, the script deemed unholy witness. In France, a left-handed baker's bread was once condemned as fit only for demons, his loaves burned in the town square. Even warfare bowed to this bias. Chronicles describe knights refusing to duel left-handed opponents, convinced their fighting style was unnatural, a gift from dark forces. The irony. Some of history's most feared warriors, like the Celtic hero, were left-handed, their unorthodox strikes giving them lethal advantage. Fear often masks envy. The church this dread. Medieval paintings showed Judas reaching left-handed for the Eucharist, while saints always gestured with their right. In some regions, priests demanded left-handed parishioners confess this affliction as a sin. The rituals to cure it were equally extreme. Parents in Germany would wrap a child's left hand in the caul of a newborn lamb, a membrane believed to transfer purity. English mothers pinned left sleeves to cribs, forcing infants to rely on their right. The psychological toll was immense. Personal diaries from the era describe left-handed adults who still felt shame decades later, their bodies trained to betray nature. Yet pockets of resistance existed. Among silk weavers left-handed artisans were prized for their intricate. Norse sagas celebrated left-handed as Odin's chosen, their fighting style disorienting foes. Even language held contradictions. While sinister warned of danger, the French gauche, left, also gave us the word for skillful cleverness. The duality reveals a deeper truth. Superstitions often reflect power struggles more than cosmic truths. Right-handed dominance mirrored societal hierarchies. The right hand of God, the right side of the throne. To be left-handed was to defy order itself. The legacy lingers in ways we barely notice. Modern scissors, desks, even can openers still favor right-handed design. Scientists estimate up to 30% of medieval left-handers were forced to switch, a statistic echoed in today's elderly populations. But the past isn't entirely oppressive. Recent studies suggest left-handedness may correlate with creativity and problem-solving, traits that might explain why medieval outliers, from artists to rebels, often fought to keep their sinister edge. After all, in a world obsessed with conformity, sometimes the greatest power lies in the hand they tried hardest to break. And if something as simple as handedness could stir such terror, imagine the panic sparked by those who spoke in tongues not their own, the so-called devil's whisperers who bridged worlds with words alone. Childbirth in the Middle Ages wasn't just a physical trial, it was a supernatural. Every newborn drew more than just a mother's gaze. Invisible eyes watched from the shadows, hungry for fresh souls. That's why placed iron scissors over cradles like drawn swords, their cold metal believed to slice through fairy magic. The logic was brutal. Fairies, repelled by iron's earthly weight, couldn't cross its barrier to swap healthy babies with sickly changelings. But the scissors had to be open, blades splayed in a cross, doubling as both weapon and holy symbol. This wasn't mere decoration. Parish records from Cornwall describe entire villages pooling their scissors after a stillbirth, hanging dozens above the next cradle in a clattering iron curtain. Then came the sudden, stabbing pains that struck new mothers without warning. Medieval healers diagnosed these as invisible arrows loosed by jealous elves, their tips dipped in otherworldly venom. The treatment, more improvisation between faiths, would press rowan wood charms against the skin, its blood-red berries symbolizing Christ's wounds, while its twisting grain mirrored pagan protective sigils. Some whispered psalms over the patient. Others invoked older names, like the Celtic goddess, patron of mothers. The mix wasn't heresy, it was healthcare. When pain explanation, every possible solution was worth trying. The rituals grew stranger in the liminal hours after birth. In Scotland, mothers kept fireplaces blazing for 3 straight nights, the smoke believed to clog fairy lungs. Irish families buried the placenta under oak trees, tying the child's fate to the sturdy trunk. Even the umbilical cord became a talisman, dried and sewn into pouches as lifelong armor against. What's revealing is how these practices crossed class lines. Castle nurseries and peasant huts alike hung herbs like John's wort, though nobles might thread them with silver wire instead of twine. Fear was the great equalizer. But why such obsession with fairies? The answer lies in medieval mortality rates. When 1 in 3 children died before age 5, supernatural blame offered solace. A changeling explained why a thriving baby withered overnight. Justified fevers no physician could cure. These weren't just stories, they were survival mechanisms, ways to endure grief in an era without germ theory. The scissors, the charms, the smoke, all were desperate attempts to control the uncontrollable. The echoes linger. Modern parents still tie red strings around cribs in some cultures, a diluted descendant of Rowan charms. The phrase, struck by a sudden pain, nods to legacy. And though we've swapped iron scissors for baby monitors, the instinct remains, to shield the vulnerable with whatever tools we believe hold power. Because medieval mothers understood something universal, that love and terror are twins, and where one walks, the other always follows. Especially when darkness falls, and the wind carries sounds that might just be laughter or wings. When Comet streaked across the night sky in 1066, it didn't just light up the heavens, it ignited panic. To medieval eyes, that fiery tale wasn't a celestial phenomenon. It was a divine warning scrawled in flames. English chroniclers recorded it as a star with hair, a phrase that sounds poetic until you realize they meant hair like a funeral shroud. Within months, William the Conqueror's armies landed at Hastings, and King Harold fell with an arrow to the eye. Coincidence? Not a chance. The comet had spoken. This wasn't isolated hysteria. Comets were the medieval equivalent of breaking news alerts, except instead of ticker tape, they brought prophecies written in cosmic fire. When Charlemagne saw a comet in 810, his court astrologers warned it signaled his death. The emperor scoffed until he died weeks later. The pattern repeated like clockwork. A comet in 1314. The Great Famine followed, wiping out millions. Another in 1456. The Ottoman Empire surged into Europe. To a society without telescopes or textbooks, these correlations weren't random. They were cause and effect etched in stardust. The terror spawned bizarre defenses. In France, villagers would ring church bells nonstop during a comet's appearance. The clangor meant to shatter its evil influence. German towns burned effigies of comets stuffed with sulfur, hoping to repel disaster with symbolic fire. Even kings weren't immune. English coronation rites included a special prayer against the comet's curse, recited while the monarch clutched a relic, usually a saint's finger bone, as spiritual armor. But the real clash came when science dared to question the dogma. Galileo's telescope revealed comets as distant objects, not heavenly omens. The Church's response. In 1616, they placed his writings on the index of forbidden books. Astronomers risked exile for mapping comet paths, their data dismissed as devil's arithmetic. The irony: medieval scholars weren't entirely wrong about comets' impacts, just the mechanism. We now know cometary dust can trigger climate shifts, and the Great Famine did follow a period of atmospheric cooling. They mistook correlation for causation, but their instincts about cosmic interconnectedness weren't baseless. What's haunting is how these fears calcified into language. Disaster comes from the Latin dis against the stars. The very word implies fate written in the sky. Today, we might laugh at the idea of comets as divine Morse code, but their legacy lingers. Financial crashes still get dubbed black swan events, a modern metaphor for unpredictable catastrophe. And when Comet returned in 1910, newspapers warned it would poison the air with cyanogen gas, sparking a global panic sale of comet pills. Spoiler: they were sugar. The medieval comet craze reveals a timeless truth. Humans will always search for patterns in chaos. Whether it's ancient kings blaming celestial fireballs or modern algorithms predicting stock markets, the drive to find meaning, even where none exists, is hardwired into us. Because in the end, the scariest thing isn't a comet's tail. It's the vast, unknowable dark behind it, reminding us how little control we truly have. And if the sky itself could turn against you, what hope was there against the monsters closer to home, like the ones they believed hid in plain sight? Wearing human skin, pointing a finger in the Middle Ages wasn't just rude. It was an act of defiance against the heavens. Imagine standing on a ship's deck as a storm brewed, the crew hissing at you to lower your hand. Because to them, pointing at the gathering clouds wasn't merely bad manners, it was an invitation for the tempest to strike. This taboo stretched far beyond weather. Stargazers whispered warnings not to trace constellations with their fingers, believing the gesture would pull down celestial wrath. Even children playing near churchyards learned early, point at a grave, and its occupant might follow you home. The roots of this fear ran deep. Ancient Norse sagas described the god Tyr losing his hand to a punishment for pointing out the beast's binding. Christian homilies equated pointing with the prideful gesture of Lucifer challenging God. By the medieval era, the act had become tangled with folk beliefs about attention itself. Pointing wasn't just directing a gaze, it was summoning forces. Fishermen would rather describe a distant ship's location in convoluted terms south by the Crooked Rock, near where the gulls gather, than risk dooming it with a fingertip. Some navigators developed elaborate hand signals, palms turned inward, as if the very angle of their fingers could deflect misfortune. Graveyards amplified the terror. Tombstones from the period sometimes bear carvings of hands with index fingers deliberately broken off, a permanent silencing of the deadly gesture. In Scotland, mourners walked backward away from fresh graves, arms crossed tightly to avoid any accidental pointing. The logic was visceral. Spirits already hovered between worlds. Why give them a beacon to latch onto? Even pointing at a name on a headstone was forbidden, as if the dead could feel the disturbance in the air. But the most chilling application came during witch trials. Accusers were warned not to point directly at the accused, lest the witch's power travel up the gesture like a lightning rod. Instead, they'd use staffs or rosary beads as intermediaries, creating a symbolic buffer. This superstition bled into art. Medieval paintings of the damned often show devils pointing gleefully, while saints gesture with open palms. The distinction was everything. A pointed finger was a weapon, an open hand a shield. What's fascinating is how this taboo reveals medieval psychology. Without understanding optics or physics, they intuited something profound. Attention shapes reality. To point was to focus unseen energies, whether divine or demonic. Modern science might call it confirmation bias. Once you highlight something, you notice its effects more. But to them, it was cosmic cause and effect. Sailors who pointed at storms and then drowned. The gesture hadn't just predicted doom, it had summoned it. We've mostly shed this fear, yet its echoes linger. Think of how we still say knock on wood after tempting fate, or avoid saying things aloud for fear of jinxing them. The medieval aversion to pointing wasn't just about ghosts or storms. It was about the terrifying power of human focus. Because deep down, we all suspect that to notice something too loudly might wake it up. And in a world where the wrong gesture could sink ships or raise the dead, every movement had to be measured. Especially when the next superstition involved something even more perilous, the belief that words themselves could take physical form. A child born in medieval Europe might go weeks without a name, not out of neglect, but as a carefully calculated defense. Parents whispered to neighbors about the little one or the new babe, terrified that speaking a true name aloud would give demons a hook to snatch the child's soul. This wasn't just caution, it was a full-blown linguistic arms race. Because in the medieval mind, names weren't just labels. They were living threads tied to the essence of a person, and to know someone's true name was to hold a knife to their fate. The rituals around naming reveal how deeply this fear ran. In Scandinavia, parents would baptize babies with temporary names like Ash Boy or Stump Child Ugly, forgettable placeholders to repel supernatural attention. Only later, often after the child survived infancy, would they reveal the real name in hushed tones at a second, secret ceremony. Welsh families took it further, giving boys 3 names. A public one, a family name known only to relatives, and a third whispered into their ear at birth by a priest, never to be spoken again until confession. It was the medieval equivalent of password layering, each name a firewall against dark forces. Witches were said to weaponize this knowledge. Trial records from Germany describe accused women allegedly stealing names by collecting hair clippings or eavesdropping on bedtime lullabies. One chilling account claims a midwife wrote a newborn's name on a slip of parchment, then buried it under a crossroads to anchor the child's spirit where demons could find it. Whether these stories were true hardly mattered. The paranoia was real enough to reshape society. This superstition birthed the tradition of middle names, originally decoys to mislead evil spirits. A child might be christened John Thomas publicly, but only the family knew he answered to Elias at home. The church both battled and exploited this fear. Priests warned that demons could overhear names during baptism if spoken too loudly, so fonts were often placed near roaring waterfalls or beneath ringing bells to mask the sound. Yet monasteries also sold name blessings, scraps of vellum inscribed with sacred symbols to wrap around a child's wrist like spiritual armor. The irony. Many saints' names themselves, like Christopher, meaning Christ-bearer, were believed to have protective power, creating a loophole where holiness could overwrite vulnerability. What's remarkable is how this superstition mirrored real medieval power structures. Serfs bound to land often bore names like Hill or Brook, literally owned by their environment. Nobles flaunted elaborate titles as displays of invincibility. If no one could pronounce your full name, how could they control you? The magic of naming bled into law. Scottish clans would rename captives to strip them of ancestral protections, while Jewish communities used Hebrew names in legal documents to invoke divine witness. Today, we've kept the shell of these rituals without the terror. Middle names persist as tradition, not defense. Yet traces linger in phrases like giving someone a piece of your mind, a folk memory of words carrying substance. Modern parents still debate baby names with surprising intensity, as if some ancestral voice whispers that a name might shape a destiny. Because medieval people understood something we often forget. Language isn't just sound. It's a current in the air, carrying the weight of who we are and who others believe we can be. And if something as simple as a name could bend fate, imagine the dread stirred by the next superstition. The belief that even a stranger's fleeting glance could crack your soul like an egg. Crossroads after dark weren't just places to avoid. They were hunting grounds for shadows with teeth. England's Black Shuck, a monstrous hound with eyes like burning coals, was said to materialize from the mist, his leaving scorch marks on the earth. Sightings weren't rare accidents, they were death warrants. Parish records from Suffolk describe a farmer who stumbled upon Shuck near a graveyard. 3 days later, his entire flock perished in a fire. But here's the twist. Not all phantom dogs brought doom. Some villages claimed these beasts were lost souls, bound to guard sacred sites. The same creature that terrified travelers in Norfolk might guide a lost child home in Devon. The church's response was in spiritual recycling. Instead of denying the folklore, they weaponized it. Gothic churches sprouted dog-faced gargoyles, not just to ward off evil, but to redirect ancient fears. If people believed hellhounds feared stone dogs, why not carve them into the architecture? A 12th century manuscript from Lincoln Cathedral even details a bishop blessing the gargoyles with holy water, effectively baptizing pagan terror into Christian service. The line between superstition and strategy vanished. What made these specters so universally chilling? Their ambiguity. Black dogs didn't just haunt, they judged. In Yorkshire, a spectral hound called the Barghest was said to appear only to those with unconfessed sins. Welsh lore spoke of the ghostly hounds whose howls signaled not just death, but divine selection, their prey destined for the afterlife's waiting room. This wasn't mindless horror, it was supernatural morality. The dogs became furry-faced executioners, their presence a verdict. Yet protection rituals reveal medieval ingenuity. Travelers carried charms, tiny silver bones inscribed with crosses, to pacify phantom hounds. Hung dogbane herbs over cradles, believing the plant's bitterness repelled supernatural sniffing. And in Cornwall, stumbling upon a black dog meant immediately turning your cloak inside out, a sartorial reset button to confuse the omen. The legacy of these legends claws into modernity. Sir Arthur's Hound of the Baskervilles borrowed directly from Devon's Shuck myths. Even today, British police logs occasionally report phantom dog sightings near ancient crossroads, usually before storms or accidents. Science might blame low-frequency infrasound for the unease, but medieval minds weren't entirely wrong about one thing. Some places do hum with unseen energy. Whether that energy has paws and glowing eyes depends on how much you trust the darkness and how fast you're willing to run. 3 wasn't just a number in the Middle Ages, it was a ticking curse. Picture a peasant hearing 3 knocks at midnight with no visitor in sight. That wasn't an echo. It was death itself counting down. This dread of triple patterns slithered into every corner of life. 3 crows perched on a fence, a funeral within the week. 3 sneezes before breakfast. Cancel your plans. Disaster was en route. Even the flicker of a candle splitting into 3 flames meant the Trinity wasn't blessing you, it was judging. Witchcraft amplified this terror. Manuscripts from the Malleus warned that spells cast 3 times gained the strength of a tidal wave. A curse whispered once might fizzle. Spoken thrice, it became unbreakable. Trial records describe accused witches repeating actions in triplets, stirring cauldrons 3 times, knotting ropes with 3 loops, as if the number itself were a supernatural multiplier. The irony, the same rule applied to holy rituals. Priests would circle sickbeds 3 times with incense, and pilgrims kissed relics in sets of 3, proving darkness and light shared the same arithmetic. But why 3? The answer lies in medieval cosmology. The Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, made 3 the holiest of numbers. Yet like all potent things, holiness had a shadow. Folk tales spoke of triple goddesses, maiden, mother, crone, and underworld hounds that always howled in trios. Even time split into thirds, past, present, future. To medieval minds, 3 wasn't just a digit, it was the universe's favorite pattern, and tampering with it invited chaos. The rituals to deflect triple doom were equally precise. In Scotland, mothers would tear bread into 3 pieces and toss one over their shoulder to pay the debt before a journey. German miners refused to descend if they heard 3 consecutive hammer strikes, believing it mimicked the sound of digging graves. And in France, lovers exchanging 3 kisses would immediately spit on the ground, a crude but fervent attempt to cancel the omen's power. What's fascinating is how this superstition warped language itself. The phrase, "third time's the charm," wasn't originally hopeful. It was a whispered plea to survive the number's danger. Shakespeare twisted it in Macbeth with the 3 witches, their chants structured in relentless triplets: double, double toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. Each repetition wasn't poetic flair, it was incantation. Modern psychology might call this triadic patterning. Our brains are wired to notice and remember things in 3s. But medieval people didn't need studies to feel its pull. They saw 3 as a threshold, the number of times a bridge could creak before collapsing, the strikes of a church bell before a storm hit. It was the rhythm of survival in a world where patterns meant predictability, and predictability meant control. The legacy lingers in ways we barely notice. 3-act story structures, triple vaccine doses, even sports rituals, batters adjusting their gloves 3 times, goalies tapping the post thrice. We've sanitized the fear, but the instinct remains. 3 isn't just a count. It's a covenant with the unseen. And sometimes, when the clock strikes 3 a.m. and the house settles into silence, you might still catch yourself holding your breath just in case. A birthmark could be a death sentence in the witch-hungry Middle Ages. Not just any mark, a mole shaped like a crescent moon, a patch of skin too smooth, even a freckle clustered in an odd pattern. These weren't natural quirks to inquisitors, they were witches' marks, physical proof of pacts signed in blood with the devil. The logic was chilling. Since demons branded their servants, any blemish might be Satan's signature. And the tests to confirm these marks. Medieval Europe turned the body into a where pain wasn't evidence. Its absence was. Inquisitors wielded needles like divining rods, probing every inch of a suspect's skin. The infamous pricking test relied on a grotesque premise. True witches' marks were numb, having been kissed by the devil himself. Records from the witch trials describe accused women being jabbed dozens of times until an insensible spot was found, often a scar or callus, sometimes just an area numbed by repeated stabbing. Some torturers used retractable blades to fake findings, while others blindfolded suspects to prove the mark reacted to holy water. The cruelty had a perverse theatricality. In Scotland, witch prickers like John became celebrities, touring villages with their kits of silver pins, silver being pure enough to detect evil. But the witch's mark myth wasn't just about moles. It reflected a deeper terror, the fear that evil could wear human skin undetected. Manuals like the Malleus warned that marks might move or vanish, as the devil is a deceiver. This justified invasive searches, shaving women's heads to hunt for devil's teats, extra nipples supposedly used to feed familiars, or examining tongues for inverted crosses. In Sweden, some trials focused on invisible marks, with suspects dunked in water to see if they floated. A lose-lose test where sinking proved purity but risked drowning, while floating confirmed witchcraft. The hysteria crossed class lines. Wealthy women accused of witchcraft would point to their silk gloves and perfumes as proof they couldn't consort with demons, only for prosecutors to argue that Satan favored refined vessels. Even children weren't spared. A 7-year-old girl was condemned after examiners found a birthmark behind her ear, shaped like a toad, the devil's favorite disguise. The mark's location, hard to see without twisting her neck, only proved its sinister purpose. What's most harrowing is how this superstition inverted medicine. Once revered for reading the body's signs, became suspects when they knew too much about birthmarks. Physicians who dismissed marks as natural were accused of being in league with witches. The body, instead of a map of health, became a ledger of guilt. And the marks themselves, they never had a chance. In a world where fear blunted reason, any blemish could be twisted into proof. A scar from childhood burns, clearly a demon's grip. A patch of vitiligo, the devil's bleach. The legacy of witches' marks lingers in our language. Marked for life still carries echoes of those trials, as does calling someone a marked man. Modern dermatology might explain moles and birthmarks, but the instinct to judge by appearance hasn't vanished. It's just swapped needles for algorithms, trading witch hunts for profiling. Because medieval people weren't entirely wrong about one thing: the human body does tell stories. The tragedy was how desperately they misread them, scribbling their own fears onto skin like a palimpsest no one could escape. The table was set with meticulous care: an extra chair, an untouched plate, a goblet filled to the brim yet never sipped. This was the dumb supper, a feast where silence hung thicker than the steam rising from roasted meats. Medieval families believed that on certain nights, the veil between worlds grew thin enough for ancestors to slip back into their old homes. But these weren't benevolent visits. A meal left unfinished wasn't just waste, it was a warning. The dead had appetites beyond food, and an empty seat might mean a spirit had brought back hungers no mortal could satisfy. The rituals varied by region, but shared a spine-chilling logic. In Brittany, place settings included knives turned blade inward, a silent threat to any ghost considering overstaying its welcome. German households baked corpse bread, loaves shaped like shrouded bodies, believing the dead would consume the effigy's essence rather than crave living flesh. The most telling detail: no one spoke during these meals. Voices might guide lost souls to the wrong hearth, or worse, attract the attention of something that wasn't family. Parish records from Burgundy describe a case where laughter during a dumb supper allegedly drew a wandering shade that haunted the village well until a priest exorcised it with salt and psalm. What made these feasts so fraught was their duality. On one hand, they were acts of love, ensuring departed mothers didn't starve in the afterlife, honoring grandfathers who taught them to sow seeds. On the other, they were transactions with teeth. Scottish will sometimes left instructions for annual dumb suppers in perpetuity, with clauses that revoked inheritances if descendants skipped them. The message was clear: respect wasn't optional. A forgotten meal might summon not grief, but vengeance. Archaeology confirms how deeply this fear ran. Excavations of medieval kitchens reveal hidden nooks near hearths, small alcoves where families would leave nightly morsels year-round, not just on feast days. Analysis of these offerings shows burnt marks consistent with rapid, high-heat cooking, as if the food needed to be sent quickly before spirits grew impatient. Some sites even yielded tiny lead scrolls tucked beneath floorboards, inscribed with pleas like "eat and depart," or "take this and trouble me no more." The church's stance was predictably conflicted. While condemning pagan ancestor worship, priests quietly tolerated dumb suppers by rebranding them as All Souls feasts. In a brilliant sleight of hand, they claimed the empty chair wasn't for ghosts, but for Elijah, a biblical loophole that let folk traditions survive under Christian veneer. Yet even this adaptation couldn't sanitize the underlying dread. Manuscripts from monastery infirmaries describe peasants' suffering, supper sickness shaking fits, blamed on ancestors furious over skimpy offerings. Modern echoes of this superstition linger in Halloween's candy bowls left outside or Mexico's Day of the Dead altars. But the medieval version lacked pastel sugar skulls. Their dead weren't cartoonish skeletons playing maracas. They were forces that could blight crops or stop a child's breath mid-cry if offended. The dumb supper's true horror wasn't the empty chair. It was the unbearable question left hanging in the air long after the plates were cleared. Had the spirits eaten their fill, or were they still hungry? Because in a world where the dead could still starve, every meal was a gamble. And no one wanted to learn what happened when the other side lost. A full moon didn't just light up the medieval night, it unraveled minds. The very word lunatic comes from luna, Latin for moon, a linguistic fossil of the belief that celestial cycles could warp human sanity. Monasteries kept iron shackles ready to restrain those who grew agitated under the moon's glow, while village healers brewed draughts of henbane and poppy to dull the lunar fever. They swore pulsed in time with the tides. But this wasn't mere folklore. It was a system of care, however flawed. When the moon swelled to its, families would hide mirrors and lock away knives, fearing the reflected light could magnify madness. Surgeons took the superstition to grisly extremes. Manuscripts from the school of Salerno warned against bloodletting during a waxing moon, convinced veins would overflow like the Thames at high tide. Even tooth extractions were postponed if the moon was full, lest the pain drive patients into irreversible frenzy. The rationale: medieval medicine believed the body's four humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, ebbed and flowed with lunar phases, just like ocean currents. A lunar eclipse was especially perilous. One 15th century midwife's journal describes wrapping newborns in red cloth during eclipses, believing the moon's stolen light left them vulnerable to lifelong melancholy. The moon's influence wasn't limited to individuals. It shaped entire communities. Farmers refused to plant root crops under a new moon, fearing stunted growth, while fishermen timed voyages to avoid the full moon's deceptive tides. In London, court records show judges delaying trials for the mentally ill until the moon waned, convinced defendants couldn't be fairly judged under its sway. The irony. Modern studies have found slight increases in emergency room visits during full moons, not because of magic, but because brighter nights lead to more activity and accidents. Medieval observers weren't entirely wrong about the pattern. They just misread the cause. What's haunting is how these rituals reveal medieval empathy. Shackling a moon-touched relative wasn't always cruelty. Sometimes it was the only way to prevent them from sprinting into the woods or gouging their own eyes out. Herbal sedatives, however crude, acknowledged that mental suffering was real and deserved relief. Even the moon itself wasn't seen as malicious, just indifferent, a force as natural as rain, yet as unpredictable as wildfire. Today, we've swapped iron manacles for pharmaceuticals and moon charts for MRI scans. But the past lingers in phrases like lunatic fringe, or the way nurses still joke about busy full moon shifts. The medieval moon madness myth wasn't just ignorance. It was an attempt to map order onto chaos, to find rhythm in the unpredictable dance of the human mind. And in that struggle, they weren't so different from us. After all, don't we still search the sky for answers when the world feels unmoored? A hen clucking in the barnyard was ordinary. A hen crowing like a rooster, that was an abomination demanding immediate execution. Across medieval Europe, the sound of a female chicken mimicking a cock's dawn call sent farmers sprinting for the axe, not out of cruelty, but sheer terror. Folklorists call it hen's prophecy, the belief that a crowing hen heralded everything from failed harvests to the fall of kings. In 1348, a chronicler in Avignon recorded panic after a local hen crowed. Weeks later, the Black Death arrived. Coincidence? To medieval minds, the connection was as obvious as the sun rising. This superstition wasn't just about poultry. It mirrored a world where boundaries between genders, species, even life and death were sacrosanct. A hen usurping the rooster's role didn't just break nature's rules. It threatened to unravel the very fabric of reality. Church sermons equated it to women preaching or peasants wearing noble garb, an inversion of the great chain of being that kept society orderly. The punishment was swift and symbolic. Beheading the hen wasn't merely killing an animal. It was restoring cosmic balance with a single chop. Farmers developed elaborate rituals to confirm the omen. Some tied red thread around the suspect hen's leg, believing true prophet hens would peck it off by midnight. Others placed the bird before a mirror. If it crowed at its reflection, the curse was deemed self-aware and doubly dangerous. Welsh livestock manuals advised mixing the hen's blood with ash to create a protective paste for barn doors, while French peasants buried the head at a crossroads to confuse wandering spirits. The hysteria crossed class lines. Royal courts employed avian augurs to inspect palace hens for signs of rebelliousness. A 15th century English ledger lists payments for sixpence to the man who slew the king's crowing hen, the executioner rewarded like a soldier who'd vanquished a foe. Even the church weighed in. A bishop's decree from Normandy mandated that crowing hens be tried by ecclesiastical courts before execution, their bodies burned to prevent resurrection. What's revealing is how this fear persisted despite practical knowledge. Many farmers knew hens could crow due to hormonal changes, especially in flocks without roosters. Yet the superstition endured because it wasn't really about chickens. It was about control over women's roles, social hierarchies, and the terrifying idea that nature might not be as fixed as authorities claimed. When a hen crowed, it wasn't just breaking poultry protocol. It was proving that even the natural order could rebel. Modern science has demystified avian biology, but the past lingers in odd corners. Some European farms still isolate crowing hens, not for fear of curses, but because old instincts die hard. And perhaps there's a lesson in that, about how quickly societies label the unexpected as dangerous, and how often the real threat isn't the anomaly itself, but our violent need to erase it. After all, history shows us time and again, the most disruptive force isn't a chicken acting like a rooster. It's the axe already swinging before we stop to ask why we're so afraid. Catching your own reflection in a window at midnight was unsettling enough. But what if your reflection blinked first? Medieval Europe lived in terror of a spectral double whose appearance wasn't just eerie, it was an omen carved in ice. Germanic lore claimed these mimics weren't ghosts or illusions, but the body's own soul momentarily slipping free. A phenomenon so dire that Swiss mercenaries would refuse to fight if they glimpsed their twin on the battlefield. The logic was brutal. If your soul had already wandered, death was simply tying up loose ends. Royalty weaponized this fear with chilling ingenuity. French chronicles describe King Charles VI employing a shadow court of to dine in his place, their faces obscured by veils to heighten the uncanny effect. The strategy worked too well. When assassins finally struck in 1392, they killed, buying the real king precious hours to flee. Persian diplomats visiting England wrote home about Henry VII's mirror men. Prisoners with passing resemblance to the monarch kept on retainer to walk the castle ramparts, drawing crossbow fire from would-be killers. The line between superstition and statecraft dissolved entirely. But for commoners, a sighting was pure existential crisis. Parish records from Bavaria tell of a baker who saw his double kneading dough at dawn. By sundown, he'd hanged himself in the same room. Some villages developed rituals to reattach wandering souls, like circling the 3 times with a lit candle or pressing a silver coin into its palm, silver being too pure for evil to counterfeit. The most heartbreaking accounts come from who swore stillborn babies sometimes appeared days later as tiny, their spectral forms fading as the real infant was buried. The Church's response was characteristically pragmatic. While denouncing as demonic tricks, priests quietly advised those who saw their doubles to immediately recite the Lord's Prayer backward, a folk charm baptized into respectability. Gothic cathedrals even incorporated soul mirrors into their architecture, polished metal discs placed near entrances where visitors could verify their reflections behaved normally. The message was clear. In God's house, even shadows had rules. What makes the myth so enduring is its psychological punch. Modern neuroscience explains these sightings as temporal lobe glitches or stress-induced hallucinations. But medieval people weren't wrong about the existential dread behind them. To meet your double is to confront the terrifying fluidity of identity, the sense that the self might not be as solid as we pretend. Literature from II would later explore this horror, but its roots lie in those candlelit nights when a traveler swore he passed himself on the road. Both versions equally convinced they were the original. Because in the end, the scariest thing about it isn't that it looks like you. It's that it might be right. A shattered mirror wasn't just broken glass in the Middle Ages, it was a fractured soul. The moment the reflective surface cracked, medieval minds believed a piece of your very essence splintered with it, leaving you vulnerable to 7 years of misfortune. This wasn't just a quaint warning, it was a mathematical certainty. Romans had linked mirrors to the soul's integrity, but medieval Europe amplified the terror. They calculated that the body regenerated itself completely over 7 years, meaning every misstep, every illness in that span could be traced back to that single moment of carelessness. And the worst part? Some claimed the cracks didn't just weaken your soul, they created doorways. Witches were said to harvest these openings. Trial records from Germany describe accused women allegedly collecting mirror shards to bottle reflections, then using them to manipulate the original person's health or will. A love spell might involve burying a fragment where a crush would walk, binding their reflection to the caster. More chillingly, Broken mirrors near sickbeds were blamed for prolonged illnesses, the patient's soul supposedly leaking through the cracks like water through a sieve. The church fueled these fears, with priests warning that demons could impersonate people by studying their reflections, then step through broken glass like a stage curtain. But the terror wasn't limited to shatters. Even intact mirrors demanded caution. During thunderstorms, households would drape every reflective surface in thick cloth, not just to prevent lightning strikes, though they correctly guessed mirrors' metal backing attracted electricity, but because they believed the flashes could charge the glass with unholy energy. Venetian glassmakers capitalized on this dread, selling storm mirrors with tiny crosses etched into the corners to neutralize the danger. Wealthy families went further, embedding holy relics behind the silvering, turning vanity items into spiritual fortresses. The rituals around mirrors reveal medieval ingenuity. To undo the 7-year curse, one could gather every fragment and grind them to dust before sunrise, scattering the powder in running water to wash away the bad luck. Others buried the shards face down under a full moon, symbolically sealing the soul's escape route. Some French villages practiced mirror funerals, where a broken-looking glass was wrapped like a corpse and interred at crossroads, complete with a eulogy to confuse lingering spirits. What's fascinating is how this superstition straddled proto-science and spirituality. Without understanding optics, medieval people intuited that mirrors held strange power, the way they reversed images, the way candlelight in their depths. When a reflection flickered in uneven light, it wasn't just physics to them. It was the soul momentarily detaching. Modern psychology might call this the mirror test of self-awareness. But to the medieval mind, it was proof that the boundary between body and reflection was perilously thin. We've sanitized these fears into party games and Halloween tropes, but the past lingers in our reflexes. How many people still hesitate before tossing a broken mirror into the trash? Or feel a prickle of unease when two mirrors face each other, creating that infinite tunnel of reflections? The medieval world understood something we've buried under rationality, that reflections unsettle us because they're almost us, but not quite. And in that gap, where the copy doesn't perfectly match the original, generations of nightmares took root. Because if a mirror could hold your soul, who's to say something isn't peering back from the other side? A wailing newborn buried at a crossroads wasn't just a tragedy. It was a desperate strategy in a world where even death couldn't end the battle for a soul. Babies, Christian burial in consecrated ground, were interred beneath the dirt where paths crossed, their tiny graves marked only by scattered hawthorn branches. The logic was chilling. Demons traveled straight roads, but crossroads forced them to hesitate, giving the infant soul precious moments to escape their grasp. This wasn't mere folklore. Parish records from 14th century York list dozens of such burials, each one a parent's agonizing compromise between faith and the terror of eternal limbo. But the horror didn't stop at the grave. If a baptized child suddenly refused to eat, spoke in odd tongues, or recoiled from its mother's touch, medieval families faced an even darker possibility. This wasn't their child at all. Fairies, they believed, stole human babies and left changelings in their place, withered, cruel mimics that drained a household's luck. The tests to expose these imposters were as brutal as the fear that inspired them. Irish families would place the child on a burning shovel, believing true fairy offspring would fly up the chimney, revealing the human infant's hidden location. German mothers bathed suspicious babies in vinegar, their logic being that fairies, repelled by the sourness, would abandon the ruse. Court documents from Burgundy describe a couple who left their changeling overnight in a freezing creek, only to find it gone by dawn. Their own child miraculously returned. The truth. Starvation or exposure likely claimed the original, but in a world without answers, supernatural blame offered solace. The Church's stance was predictably conflicted. While condemning fairy beliefs as pagan, priests tacitly encouraged changeling hysteria by linking it to original sin. A child's strange behavior became proof of the devil's lingering influence. Some clergy even performed reverse baptisms, sprinkling holy water while commanding the fairy to depart. The ritual's cruelty was overshadowed only by its pathos. Parents weeping as they threatened their own child, bargaining with unseen forces for the return of a baby who might never have been taken at all. Archaeology confirms the depth of this terror. Excavations of medieval cottages reveal cradles modified with iron nails, metal believed to repel fairies, and hearthstones carved with cryptic symbols to lock babies into the human world. In Wales, folklorists recorded mothers singing lullabies with hidden verses. "Sleep, my stolen one, and the real you will wake." The lyrics weren't poetry. They were incantations, blurring love and desperation into a single plea. What makes the changeling myth so haunting is its psychological honesty. In an era when half of children died before age 5, and disabilities or developmental disorders explanation, fairies became scapegoats for unbearable grief. A mother could more easily burn a changeling than accept her own child might never recognize her. The crossroads burials, the vinegar baths, the whispered prayers, all were attempts to impose order on chaos, to believe that somewhere, even in fairy mounds, their real child still lived. Modern medicine has given us names for the conditions medieval people blamed on changelings: autism, epilepsy, genetic disorders. But the legacy of that fear lingers in our language. We still call unpredictable children fae, and the word changeling survives as a metaphor for radical transformation. The past whispers in pediatric wards where parents beg for second opinions, in the way we describe ailing children as fighting unseen battles. Because medieval parents understood something we often forget. The line between superstition and hope is paper-thin when love is measured in borrowed time. And sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, every parent still wonders if they're truly seeing the child before them, or just the reflection of their own deepest fears. These 20 superstitions reveal more than medieval credulity. They're a mirror held up to the human condition, our need to explain the unexplainable, to control the uncontrollable. From sneezes to stars, from crossroads to cradles, our ancestors built intricate defenses against the darkness, brick by irrational brick. And though we've traded iron charms for insurance policies and fairy lore for, the essential question remains. When faced with life's chaos, how far would we go to believe we've tamed it? The answer, perhaps, is written in the scars we don't admit we still carry, the ones shaped like old spells we pretend we've forgotten. From sneezes to stars, medieval life was a tapestry of fear and faith. But to dismiss these beliefs as mere ignorance misses the point entirely. These weren't just idle fancies. They were the operating system of an entire era, coded into everything from royal decrees to the way a mother swaddled her newborn. Consider the sheer scale of their influence. Wars delayed because a crow flew left instead of right, kings consulting astrologers before signing treaties, entire villages abandoning fertile land after a single nightmare. Superstitions weren't the background noise of history. They were the conductor's baton. What's truly astonishing is how many of these instincts survive in our modern world, disguised as habit or tradition. Knocking on wood, avoiding walking under ladders, holding your breath past graveyards. These aren't just quirks. They're the genetic memory of a time when the universe felt alive with invisible threats. The medieval baker who tossed salt over his shoulder to blind demons would recognize the same impulse in a football player refusing to wash his lucky socks. The tools have changed, but the terror remains. That somewhere just beyond our control, forces are waiting to tip the scales. Yet there's something beautiful in this continuity. These superstitions reveal how desperately humans have always sought patterns, even when none existed. A peasant blaming a failed harvest on a neighbor's evil eye wasn't so different from us obsessing over weather apps. Both are attempts to impose order on chaos. The rituals might seem irrational now, but they were the first form of risk management, a way to say, if I do this one thing, maybe the storm will pass. So the next time you catch yourself throwing spilled salt over your shoulder or hesitating before opening an umbrella indoors, remember, you're not just following an old wives' tale. You're whispering back to 1,000 years of ancestors who stood under the same sky, grappling with the same dread. History isn't just dates and battles. It's the collective heartbeat of everyone who's ever tried to outsmart the dark. Which of these medieval fears still haunt your habits? Do you avoid certain numbers or cling to charms older than your great-grandparents? Drop your stories below, because every confession is another thread in the tapestry. And if you've ever wondered what other shadows from the past still shape our present, hit subscribe. The past isn't done with us yet. After all, some doors once opened are harder to close than a medieval grave at midnight.